Horde versus the Alliance has been the staple of the Warcraft universe. In fact, orcs versus humans concept is literally Warcraft itself, like this is Warcraft. However, seeing how much we evolved from Warcraft 1 up to the Shadowlands, could this concept of factions be outdated? Really, why are we even fighting at this point? We're getting rid of Sylvanas. Obviously, the Horde itself didn't want the war in BFA, and neither did the Alliance. We have universe-shattering threats to deal with, and combining the factions in two might be a great way to consolidate the player base and to have everyone playing with each other. Could this be a reality? First, I was a bit skeptical about this wallet, but Ridge, the sponsor of this video, sent it to me about a year and a half ago, and really, I've not used any other wallet since then. It is actually great. You can put 12 cards inside, and you can put cash here as well, and there are over 30 colors and styles you can choose from. Check out my link in the description to get a 10% discount with code DORON and get your own Ridge wallet. Horde versus Alliance makes sense, or at least it made a lot of sense in the past. This started with the orcish horde of orcish demons and the relatively modest Alliance of Lordaeron. Why wouldn't you want these factions? An entire horde of aliens was invading the planet, and the denizens of Azeroth had to unite to defend their homes despite different interests. Then, as Warcraft evolved and the new horde was formed with Troll and Kalimdor, the distance, the animosity, the contemporary political events, all of it made sense. Orcs and humans still hated each other. There was quite a bit of bad blood between the two. However, there wasn't the gist of the conflict. We had night elves that were right on the border of orcish territory, and the orcs weren't exactly there to respect their sacred lands and forests. On the other side of the planet, the Forsaken, aka the undead that used to be the Scourge, were controlling Lordaeron, the crown jewel of human civilization, and most humans weren't exactly happy about it. So there were many reasons for the conflict. Through external provocations and deception, conflicts were constantly created. At the same time though, both factions obviously had the idea of working together and putting an end to war. This started all the way back in Warcraft 3 when we were fighting against Archimond. In fact, that is almost what everyone wanted, but every time someone else just intervened, caused the problem, and then we had war. Remember Vradgate? That was when the Dreadlords and a few rogue Forsaken caused an entire mess. Even though the orcs and the humans were fighting shoulder to shoulder, like literally shoulder to shoulder, didn't miss up in the area. Garrosh was the one that sparked the flames of war, and ultimately the factions united to battle against him. Later on, the Horde and the Alliance banded together to battle against the Legion, but it was Gen and Sylvanas that had issues from the past that, in an unauthorized way, started a war. This was additionally related to the Jailer and his plans. Subsequently, after we battled that major threat, BFA started because, Sylvanas was manipulated by Zowal, so really it was an outside force pulling all the strings. Looking at Saurfang, one of the most influential figures, and most of the Horde, they obviously didn't want this war. They were actively against it, and neither did the Alliance, but Sylvanas and Zobal dragged everyone in so they can fill them all with a bunch of souls. Sylvanas burned down Teldrassil, and now Anduin obviously had to retaliate by attacking Lordaeron. If he didn't do that, everyone would just think he is weak, and there might even be a civil war, which would be an even larger catastrophe. However, as BFA ended, Sylvanas was exposed, and once again the factions united together. I mean, even Anduin gave his own father's sword to Saurfang. What even is the point of us fighting each other? Why is the Horde battling the Alliance at this point in the lore? Like, literally just ask yourself this question: why are we fighting? You would no doubt be thinking quite a bit before you come up with an actual concrete answer to this question. Right now, we're fighting Sylvanas together, and all the covenants that all of us are a part of are allies, and are working together to gather the sigils and to save the universe. We have this crazy jailer guy that wants to undo the creation of the reality of the cosmos itself. So why should we, the denizens of Azeroth, the few that are left in the entire universe, battle against each other? Are we just not done already? Seriously, just look at the timeline and keep in mind, in-game, like a year or more passes between expansions. We had a massive war against the Lich King. We won with terrible losses. We hit a giant, ancient, old god-corrupted dragon shatter half the world, causing without a doubt a huge refugee crisis, and it took our combined efforts to defeat him. We had an entire expedition in Pandaria, then we had a really costly invasion in alternate Draenor where we spent a ton of our own resources to fight on a completely different planet, like fight literal copies of previous characters we had seen. Then we had our biggest catastrophe, the largest invasion of the Burning Legion of Azeroth ever. As you can tell by the broken shore, we lost a ton, and both factions were significantly damaged. However, barely months passed and then we had a crazy all-out war between ourselves, burning two major capital cities down with the Horde spiraling out into civil war again, and now we have a relatively less costly invasion of the Shadowlands. However, the Scourge did go rampant across Azeroth, or at least it is supposed to be. Now, to get a perspective on this, keep in mind all the stuff I just mentioned happened in the matter of like one single decade. Realistically, from a logistical perspective, how do we even have the ability to continue fighting between ourselves? This is really the actual question. How is it physically possible for us to recover the manpower that we lost across this decade? And now that crazy ancient powers are coming for our planet, as the jailer said that death is coming for the soul of our planet, is it finally time to drop the war axes and to just get to working together, but working together for real this time? From a gameplay perspective, this might also make sense. Not really many things make the factions unique at this point. You can get most classes with multiple races now. Most importantly, it is no secret that the player base is dwindling, especially when compared to Wrath of the Lich King. So would doing such a drastical change as removing the factions be the solution to consolidate everyone into one group so that we can get friends to play with each other, even though one is an orc and the other is a human? I know you may be wondering, but what about PvP? And you're right, but really, outside of a few all-out wars such as BFA, there really is no actual lore reason for PvP, so we could just keep it as arenas or maybe battlegrounds. However, in the case of battlegrounds, it wouldn't be Horde versus the Alliance, but more like the Goblin Trade Company versus the Gnome Trade Company, as in fighting as mercenaries or having some other type of factions that are in the Alliance and the Horde. Now, I did mention that there was no reason to fight in the future, but I did kinda half lie. Currently, the biggest way the War of the Factions could continue is with Tyrellian, Lordaeron, and him attacking the former human kingdom, and again, still keeping a grudge and wanting to retake Gilneas. But this is of course, even though possible, not a confirmation that a war will be happening soon. It is possible that Tyrellian tries to drag us all into a new faction conflict, but then the factions finally unite, like for real this time, and then we battle against the light itself, or maybe even the void if a void invasion happens. Additionally, a bit of an outlandish idea is that if a light or a void invasion happens, those could be the new factions we could pick a side in the cosmological struggle and still maintain rivalry, but at least the factions would be up to date and would kinda make sense with the current events, because really at this point having the Horde and the Alliance being huge enemies and nemesis just doesn't make all that much sense. On the other side, I am aware that just, straight out removing two factions could backfire in a big way. The Alliance and the Horde have been the staple of the Warcraft series, but especially World of Warcraft, and there has been a serious rivalry going on for, nearly 2 decades, so this might not sit right with many older players that have tied their identity towards the factions of their playable character. I also don't know how I would feel about it, because it would really depend on how it would be done and how it would be justified, but if done in the right way, I wouldn't mind the Horde and the Alliance uniting, but this time for real. Thank you for watching. Check out the Dreadlords, the next playable race, by clicking on the screen, and check out Doran's Academy for videos on real world history and science. See you next time.